They laughed at me the moment I walked away from the car I had slept in the night before. Not polite laughter, not the easy laughter people give when they share a joke. No, this was the laughter that cut through the air like knives, sharp and unrelenting, the kind that made your very bones ache. I remember the way the city smelled that night, a mixture of rain-soaked asphalt and trash, with a hint of exhaust from the few cars that passed by. The cold bit through the thin coat I had scavenged from a donation bin, and my hands shook not from the chill, but from a fire that had been quietly burning inside me for years. The fire of knowing I had been dismissed, discarded, and humiliated by the very people who were supposed to love me. It had not always been this way. Once I had dreams like any child, bright, hopeful, insistent on being more than the sum of my family's expectations. My parents, Andre and Margaret, had always favored my younger sister, Leora. She was everything I was not, charming, effortlessly likable, brilliant in the way that drew people to her. I, on the other hand, had stubbornness that bordered on recklessness, honesty that often backfired, and an ambition that made them uncomfortable. They called me difficult, a disappointment, a lost cause, and when I pressed too hard, when I dared to carve my own path instead of the one they designed for me, they closed doors. I remember my first job after college, a small marketing firm that offered me a modest stipend and endless responsibility. I was proud of my work, proud that I had managed to survive on my own, but every time I brought up my achievements at family dinners, they brushed them aside. "That's nothing," my father would say. "Wait until you do something real." And my mother would smile, a tight, thin smile that never reached her eyes, as if to remind me that no matter what I accomplished, I would always be invisible next to Leora. The invisible child grew into an invisible adult, surviving on scraps of opportunity, scraping together every dollar, sleeping wherever I could find shelter. Some nights I slept on the couch of a colleague who lived in a cramped studio. Other nights in my car, its backseat my bed, the dashboard my pillow. I learned quickly that dignity was a luxury, and perseverance was the only currency that mattered. I learned how to make the invisible visible. Years passed. Each small success, each promotion, each side hustle brought me closer to the life I dreamed of, but every time I tried to share it with my family, their laughter met me. A few years ago, I finally had enough. I was done seeking approval, done begging for acknowledgement, done explaining myself. I turned my focus entirely to building something that was mine, and mine alone. I found an old building in Manhattan, a shell of what it could be, neglected, forgotten, dismissed by everyone except me, and I poured everything into it. Every spare dollar, every sleepless night, every ounce of my intellect and energy became bricks and mortar, equity and design. It became my obsession. Meanwhile, my family remained blissfully unaware. They continued their charade of success, throwing parties in spaces that belonged to others, speaking as if they had earned every luxury while I worked in the shadows, unnoticed, calculating. Leora would post on social media about family time, photos carefully curated to display wealth, charm and grace. Andre and Margaret would smile and nod at compliments, oblivious to the fact that I was quietly buying the building they would soon covet. The day I finally acquired the property was surreal. I remember sitting in my modest apartment, the papers spread before me, the pen in my hand, and realizing that I held the power now. $8.3 million. The building, the renovations, the apartments, all under my name, and I didn't even have to flaunt it. The satisfaction was internal, simmering. I knew the moment my family would realize the truth would be the sweetest form of revenge, silent, yet devastating. Months of planning followed. I learned every loophole in real estate law. I studied contracts, tenants' rights, property management intricacies. I built a network of allies, lawyers, accountants, neighbors, even a few of Leora's former friends who had grown tired of her condescension. They all believed in discretion, in the quiet fulfillment of justice. Every step was methodical. Every move was designed to maximize impact while minimizing exposure. Finally, the day came. My family had scheduled one of their typical family gatherings. In the building I had almost lost to their ignorance and arrogance. Chandeliers sparkled, champagne flowed, laughter bounced off the walls that I now owned. Leora, radiant in a designer gown, circulated among the guests, boasting about family triumphs as if I had never existed. My parents stood nearby, nodding and smiling, oblivious to the storm that had been quietly gathering beyond the doors. I entered as if by accident, wearing an elegant yet understated outfit, hair tied back to expose the calm strength in my eyes. No one recognized me at first. I allowed a small, deliberate smile to curve my lips, letting them wonder for a fraction of a second if this was the same person they had once dismissed as a failure. The room shifted imperceptibly. Conversation stuttered, eyes flicked toward me. "I wasn't expecting you," Leora said, her voice brittle, controlled. "I thought I'd just come by to see the renovations," I said softly. "Everything looks wonderful." My tone was casual, almost indifferent, but it carried weight, the weight of quiet triumph and unacknowledged struggle. Whispers grew as I walked further into the hall. "Who is she? I didn't know she lived in the city." The timing was perfect, right before the main toast, when all attention was focused on Leora and the grandeur of the event. I called the building manager to the podium, a neutral man who had been quietly assisting me for months. Clearing his throat, he addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed, I must inform you that there has been a recent update regarding the ownership of this property." He paused deliberately, letting the room hang on his words. "This building is now legally owned by Miss Celeste Marrick." The room froze. My family's smiles faltered, replaced by confusion, shock, and the first signs of panic. Celeste Marrick, my carefully chosen name, my shield and my sword, had become the embodiment of their oversight, their arrogance, their cruelty. This isn't possible," my father stammered, his voice trembling, the confident tone of his usual arrogance nowhere to be found. "Oh, it's very possible," I said, calm, measured. "The paperwork has been finalized. The renovations you admired, the fixtures you praised, the rent you assumed you were paying to a management company, all of it is under my name now. I own every square inch of this building." Gasps, murmurs, and whispers rippled through the crowd. I let the silence stretch, each second a slow burn of satisfaction. "You are, of course, welcome to stay," I continued, "under my management. All terms are outlined in the lease agreements I've provided to your mailbox." Leora's knees almost gave out. You can't do this," she whispered, but I merely smiled faintly. Not cruelly, just firmly, unapologetically. In the following weeks, the consequences unfolded quietly but unmistakably. Tenants in other parts of the building realized the change in ownership. Neighbors, real estate professionals, and even social circles within the city began to murmur about the rise of Celeste Marrick, the woman who had been homeless, dismissed, and ridiculed, now the master of a multi-million-dollar building. My family's social circle turned cautious. They called not to congratulate, but to understand, to salvage whatever pride they could. And I watched it all silently. I never raised my voice. I never gloatingly displayed my success. I let the quiet authority of reality speak for itself. Every laugh that had been directed at me, every scornful glance, every cruel word, all had become fuel for this reclamation of dignity. Nights were the most satisfying. I would stand by my office window looking out at the city lights reflecting off the glass of my building, the life I had created, and think back to those nights on the street. The cold, the hunger, the fear, all had sharpened me, honed me into someone unstoppable. My family could try to assert influence, rebuild their social image, or pretend they were in control. None of it mattered. The building, the financial control, the reputation, it all belonged to me. The power of quiet, patient, intelligent revenge was intoxicating. It was not loud. It was not flashy, but it was absolute. My family could exist under my roof in the apartments they had once claimed as their own, unaware of the reality. The woman they laughed at, the one they left behind, now held every key. And she had done it without breaking a sweat. The satisfaction was private but immense. Every interaction with them, every glance of realization that they were no longer in control, became a secret victory I savored in silence. They could not undo it. They could not challenge it. The woman they had dismissed, the girl they had laughed at when she slept in her car, now owned their world. And every laugh, every sneer, every word of disdain had contributed to the creation of that power. It was poetic justice, slow, deliberate, and utterly satisfying, and I had only just begun. After that night I realized something crucial. Victory wasn't only about possession. Ownership of the building had been a dramatic blow, but the true satisfaction came from dismantling the illusions my family had built around themselves. They had thrived on appearances, on the fragile power of assumed superiority. If I wanted my revenge to be total, it had to extend beyond the walls of the building and into every sphere where they had claimed dominance. I began by observing them, quietly, methodically. My father, once a man who commanded attention with every word, became increasingly restless. His office calls became terse, his dinners more silent. He tried to assert influence in social circles we had once moved in together, but each attempt was met with polite, distant acknowledgement, no warmth, no deference. I had ensured that the news of my ownership reached the right people in the city's elite networks. Every casual introduction, every whispered comment, every chance encounter reminded them subtly that the person they had dismissed was now at the center of power they had always craved. Leora was harder to read. Her pride was sharp, and she masked her fear with forced charm, yet I could see it in the subtle tremor of her hands when she signed letters or in the way she avoided eye contact when discussing financial matters. She had been trained to think in terms of instant gratification, of appearances. I, on the other hand, had learned patience, long-term vision, and the power of influence cultivated quietly. I started to expand my leverage. I didn't just own the building. I began acquiring neighboring properties, small businesses, and ventures tied to my family's interests. Every move was deliberate. I ensured that every purchase intersected with something they valued, but none of it was blatant. Nothing screamed vengeance, it whispered, it suggested. It created discomfort and uncertainty in subtle waves that grew with every passing week. I reached out to former allies of my family, people who had once been charmed or manipulated by their wealth and influence. Some had been dismissed or ignored in my family's rise. Others had quietly resented them. I offered partnerships, advice, and discreet mentorship. Slowly, the network began to bend toward me, not in overt allegiance but in practical reality. Business favors, social introductions, and legal counsel now flowed in my direction rather than theirs. My family's sphere of control began to shrink. I could see it in the way invitations that used to arrive for them were quietly redirected. I could feel it in the way former friends approached me with careful politeness, curiosity, and respect. Meanwhile, I never lost sight of my own development. I attended late-night meetings, pored over contracts, and studied market trends. I learned more about the financial web that connected my family's interests than they realized. Every misstep they made, a poorly considered partnership, a reckless investment, a careless social blunder, I catalogued and stored as leverage for later. The beauty of this approach was that it appeared accidental to the outside world. Celeste Marrick, the friendly neighbor or successful real estate entrepreneur, seemed courteous, polite, and ordinary. Yet behind every smile, every nod, lay a carefully constructed plan. Then there were the tenants. I made it a point to visit each apartment, speak with the residents, and ensure that their experience under my ownership was professional, fair, and even warm. I became a figure they trusted, admired, and occasionally feared, the latter not because I threatened them, but because they understood that I was competent, precise, and unwavering. Word of this reached my family through quiet channels. They could not command respect from tenants the way they had once done because respect, as I had learned, is earned, not assumed. One afternoon I received a call from a longtime acquaintance of Leora's social circle. She sounded hesitant, careful. "Celeste, I think you should know your family is trying to secure a loan for a new venture downtown. They're counting on connections that don't seem to exist anymore." I listened patiently, asking questions but revealing nothing. Later, when I confirmed the facts, I smiled quietly. Every corner of influence they thought was theirs was subtly slipping. I did not need to rush. I did not need to announce myself. Their desperation, unacknowledged and growing, became the silent soundtrack of my victory. I orchestrated situations where their pride led them into tiny errors. A contractor misread a building code in one of their minor projects. I discreetly informed the city inspectors. Leora attempted to impress a potential client with an idea she claimed was original, only for me to present a better, fully researched alternative in a nearby venue. My father tried to leverage a financial institution for a favorable loan, only to find that the terms had shifted due to my timely investment maneuvers. Each incident was minor to outsiders, but to them, the pattern was undeniable. The woman they had dismissed was quietly, efficiently, and irreversibly moving every piece on the board to her advantage. The subtlety of my revenge was intoxicating. I watched the social cracks widen without any overt aggression. Leora's friends began to hesitate before offering support, unsure whether to align with the now dominant sibling. My parents attempted to rally old contacts, but their influence had dwindled. Invitations to events they once hosted were now directed to me. Gentle, polite mentions of my successes appeared in newspapers and local social media, with no exaggeration, no embellishment, just facts. My family's social map was shrinking, and I had expanded mine quietly and flawlessly. One evening, I hosted a private dinner for a few of my key allies, mentors, business partners, and former contacts of my family who had come to recognize my competence and discretion. The meal was lavish, but intimate, designed to celebrate progress without attracting attention. I spoke with each guest about projects, opportunities, and vision, not about revenge or past humiliation. Yet every mention of my family's recent missteps, carefully framed, reinforced their awareness that I was now in control. By the end of the evening, the alliances were solid, networks intertwined, and the silent power I wielded had become undeniable. At home, I allowed myself moments of reflection. The past haunted me, yes, but only to remind me why I had taken this path. I thought about the nights of hunger, the nights of fear, the nights when I convinced myself that one more day would bring opportunity. I remembered the voices of my parents mocking my ambitions, telling me I lacked discipline, intelligence, and vision. I remembered Leora's smug laughter at family gatherings, a sound that had once made my chest tighten with despair. Every memory became fuel, every slight transformed into motivation. Yet I also learned patience. I did not need to accelerate the revenge unnecessarily. I had set the stage with precision. They could flail, attempt small maneuvers, and fail in ways that were embarrassing yet instructive. My network, my knowledge, my presence, all functioned as quiet levers that shifted power without confrontation. Each small victory compounded, like drops filling a reservoir. And soon, the moment would come when the final act could unfold, and they would understand the full scope of what had been accomplished. I remember walking through the hallways of my building one late evening, alone, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside. I touched the polished brass handles, ran my hand along the smooth glass panels, and felt a deep satisfaction. This was more than property, more than money. This was the manifestation of resilience, intelligence, and careful orchestration. My family had laughed at me, abandoned me, and assumed I would never rise. Now every corner of their confidence rested in my hands, and they did not even know it yet. I began to subtly send messages, not threats, not boasts, just reminders of presence and competence. A brief email, a casually mentioned investment, a perfectly timed project that outshone their efforts. Each communication reinforced the growing awareness that the world they had assumed belonged to them now respected and feared my competence. And with every ripple, I could see them adjusting, compensating, flailing, all without realizing that the tides had shifted permanently. The ultimate confrontation was near. I had studied their patterns, their vulnerabilities, their expectations. I knew exactly how to engineer the perfect moment when pride, ignorance, and curiosity would intersect. When the event arrived, it would be not just the dramatic announcement of ownership, which I had already made, but a complete reordering of influence, a reshaping of perception that would leave them unmoored. They would understand, finally, that the woman they laughed at, the one they left behind in hardship, had outmaneuvered them completely. And in the calm of my own office, watching the city lights reflect off the glass towers, I felt it, the quiet, patient, absolute satisfaction of someone who had turned adversity into power, who had taken every slight and weaponized it with precision. They could not undo it, they could not reclaim it, and in their quiet, subtle suffering they would finally understand the truth. I had won without arrogance, without spectacle, but with total mastery. The night of the final event arrived like a quiet storm, imperceptible yet inevitable. I had orchestrated every detail so carefully that even my family, masters of appearances and timing, could not anticipate what was coming. I did not announce my presence. I did not flaunt my power in advance. Instead, I arrived as the evening shadows lengthened over Manhattan, moving through the building that they had once thought theirs, a building that now belonged entirely to me. The hall was filled with familiar faces, their friends, colleagues, and neighbors, all there under the assumption that it was a family gathering celebrating some milestone of my parents or Leora. Chandeliers sparkled, the scent of polished wood and fresh flowers hanging in the air. Leora, radiant as ever, was at the center, carefully controlling the narrative, ensuring that everyone knew her success was the product of family effort, an effort she claimed included me, subtly erased from the story entirely. My parents were beside her, smiling, nodding, presenting the illusion of control that they had clung to for decades. I let them enjoy their moment a few minutes longer. They were relaxed, arrogant, unaware of the storm approaching. Then I stepped into the room. My presence was quiet, almost unassuming, yet every eye turned immediately. Murmurs rose as recognition settled in, a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning fear. The woman they had left to the streets, the one they had laughed at when she slept in her car, was standing in the center of the hall, calm, composed, and fully in command. "I didn't expect you," Leora said, her voice brittle, betraying the panic beneath her practiced charm. "I'm here," I replied softly, "to celebrate something entirely different." The room shifted as I allowed the words to hang. Whispers filled the air, tension mounting. I motioned discreetly toward the building manager, who stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my duty to clarify that the ownership of this property has changed. As of this week, the building is legally owned by Miss Celeste Marrick." Gasps, startled glances, and confusion swept through the room. My parents' smiles froze. Leora's hand tightened around her champagne flute. Celeste Marrick, my chosen name, my identity forged through struggle, perseverance, and strategy, now stood as the embodiment of everything they had underestimated. This isn't possible," my father said, voice trembling, a shadow of the arrogance he had once wielded with ease. "Oh, it's very possible," I said, calm, steady, each word measured. "The documents are complete. Every apartment, every fixture, every renovation you admired, all under my name. I own this building outright." The room fell silent, the magnitude of the revelation settling over everyone. Leora's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. She had been trained to handle public attention, to control narrative, yet now she was powerless. My parents shifted uneasily, their carefully constructed facade cracking before a roomful of witnesses. I continued, my voice calm, deliberate, without malice but with authority. "You are, of course, welcome to remain as tenants, with all terms laid out in your lease agreements, which I trust you have received. Everything is above board, legally binding, and unalterable." The shock radiated in waves. Conversations faltered. Invitations, casual gestures, even friendly nods toward my family now carried uncertainty. They were no longer the center, they were subordinate, aware of a power they had never earned. I let the pause linger. The silence was far more powerful than any speech I could deliver. Then quietly I walked through the hall, letting every eye follow me. I spoke to a few guests in passing, offering subtle praise, casual remarks, but always with calm authority. Every movement reinforced my dominance without the need for aggression. The quiet confidence I exuded was a stark contrast to the trembling uncertainty radiating from my family. Over the next several weeks I expanded my influence, solidifying the quiet but undeniable shift. I arranged minor renovations that increased property value, implemented tenant programs that garnered praise in local circles, and ensured that every small achievement became known through subtle social channels. My family attempted to assert authority, make contact, influence decisions, yet every move was countered seamlessly, with patience and precision. My control was total, yet invisible to those who had once underestimated me. I began to weave a network that extended beyond property. Business contacts of my parents, former colleagues of Leora, and local influencers all began to gravitate toward me, drawn by competence, reliability, and quiet authority. Opportunities that had once been reserved for them were now in my hands. Invitations arrived addressed to me. Consultations sought for advice, collaborations proposed under my discretion. They could not stop it, could not reclaim the influence they assumed was theirs. I also observed the emotional unraveling of my family, not with cruelty, but with a clinical understanding of human nature. Leora's charm became strained. The polished veneer my parents had maintained for decades began to chip. Social circles, once eager to align with them, approached me instead. Invitations that used to come naturally to their door now required negotiation, explanation, or were simply redirected. Their arrogance, built on assumption, crumbled silently under the weight of truth and competence. I allowed myself small victories, each carefully measured. A minor project they had claimed credit for was subtly reattributed to me in a local industry newsletter. A social event they organized that required approvals and permits faced unexpected scrutiny, handled effortlessly by my team in advance. Leora tried to impress a client with a plan she thought original, only for me to unveil a superior, fully researched alternative at a nearby venue, anonymously celebrated by mutual contacts. Each incident was minor to the casual observer, but to them, the cumulative effect was undeniable. They were being outmaneuvered quietly, completely. And then came the final, undeniable act. I invited a small, carefully curated group of tenants, business allies, and media contacts to a private reception in the building. My family assumed it was another social gathering, another minor event. The guests arrived, unaware of the deeper significance. I greeted them personally, guiding the conversation to acknowledge the building, its management, and subtle details of ownership, allowing every word to carry weight without the need for explicit confrontation. The result was immediate and profound. My family was exposed not just as tenants, but as figures stripped of assumed authority. Their friends, colleagues, and social circles saw the reality. The woman they had ridiculed, abandoned, and underestimated now controlled the environment they had flaunted as their own. They were powerless, visible, and entirely subordinate. I watched it unfold with a sense of quiet satisfaction, not joy in cruelty, but the satisfaction of intelligence, patience, and resilience rewarded. Every strategic move I had made, every lesson learned from hardship, every calculated investment, every subtle manipulation of circumstance had culminated in this moment. The building, the social influence, the networks all belonged to me. And more importantly, my family now understood in the most personal way possible the consequences of underestimating someone they had once deemed worthless. At night I sometimes lingered in the office overlooking the city. The streets gleamed with reflections from glass towers, a mosaic of human ambition and activity. I thought back to the nights I had slept in my car, the chill that had numbed me, the hunger that had driven me to resourcefulness. I remembered every insult, every dismissal, every laugh that had once crushed me, and I allowed myself a private smile, not vindictive, not cruel, simply acknowledgement. I had survived, I had endured. I had triumphed. And I had done it quietly, deliberately, flawlessly. In the weeks that followed, the city adjusted to the reality of my ownership. Tenants praised the improvements, neighbors acknowledged my presence, and social circles took note. My family attempted small moves to regain influence, but each effort was anticipated, countered, or rendered irrelevant. The power balance was settled. Their laughter, once a source of humiliation, had become the engine of my methodical rise. Every slight, every sneer, every dismissive glance had been repaid not with malice, but with mastery. The true satisfaction of revenge, I realized, was not spectacle. It was subtlety, patience, and precision. My family remained in the building, navigating a new reality they had neither prepared for nor could escape. They moved through their daily lives under the shadow of a presence they had long ignored, unaware that every corner of the environment, every legal, social, and financial lever, was controlled by the very person they had abandoned. I had become the embodiment of what they had failed to recognize: resilience, intelligence, and quiet, undeniable power, and in that knowledge I found the ultimate peace. They had laughed at me when I was homeless. Now they lived under my control in the $8.3 million building that bore my name, and the world finally acknowledged what they had never seen coming. The woman they dismissed, the one they abandoned, had not just survived, she had risen, she had conquered, and she had done so with elegance, precision, and unshakable authority. The quiet satisfaction lingered, richer than any applause, deeper than any public recognition. Revenge had been served perfectly and in the most enduring way possible, not with anger but with mastery. And as I looked out over the city lights, I knew one truth that they would never forget. The woman they laughed at had become the architect of their reality, and she had done so silently, brilliantly, and completely.